shifting your identity is actually a lot easier than you've been making it. And most people who talk about this honestly have it completely wrong, or at least are certainly not telling you the full story about what it actually means and what it takes. I'm sure at this point you've heard literally a million people saying, this is the secret to success. Shift your identity and everything will change. The magic will happen. The riches will fall into your lap. And that's only part of the story. For it to really all come together for you, you need to understand what it actually means to shift your identity. And to do this, I'm going to explain 3 extremely important things to you that are going to allow you to understand what it actually means to shift your identity and how to actually have the shift that you want to have in your life. So the first very important step is that you're actually shifting the identity of who you believe you are. And what I mean by this is you're not going into your mind, into your thoughts, and making up a brand new story about who you are to try to replace the old story. You are shifting from believing you are the mind in stories altogether into believing that, or knowing that, you are the awareness that observes your mind. The reason this is extremely important is that if you try to layer a new identity on top of old patterns and old neural pathways, and you haven't made this shift out of the mind to become the observer, then what's going to happen is you're going to keep on feeding the old thoughts and the old stories that you've been telling yourself. And then you're going to start trying to forcibly, layer some positive stuff on top and expect to see this magical shift. But part of changing your identity is just realizing who you really are, realizing your true self. And your true self is this open space of awareness. So from this open space of awareness, when you start to understand this and you can step out of the mind and just observe it, be aware of it, you can start to see that you are not this character that you've been betraying. You are not these stories and beliefs that you've been holding on to. And from that perspective, you can start to see where the shift happens in the sense of, okay, well, if I'm not this character I've been playing, means, I could mold this character however I want to from this new perspective. So without this kind of foundational understanding of you're not the mind, someone just tells you, think positive and think happy based whatever identity thoughts, but you're still just kind of blindly lost in your mind, then you're going to think, maybe you'll think positive in the morning, but then you have not trained your awareness to stay outside of the identification with the mind. And so throughout the day, you'll just be falling blindly back into the old patterns and ways of thinking. And in neuroscience, I'm sure you've heard whatever wires together, fires together, whatever, fires together, wires together, whatever they say. Well, it's also true that whatever doesn't fire together starts to close. So what I mean by this is when you cease to follow the old story, when you cease to identify with the old way of thinking about yourself, those neural pathways actually begin to shrink. And so when you step out of the mind and you are as awareness, just observing, you can start to choose what you give your attention to and what kind of thoughts you're going to entertain. And this can truly take some time before this really becomes clear, because I'm sure, most people they're so used to following the mind that it's not as easy as just 1, 2, 3, freaking everything's hunky-dory and great. Kind of takes some time to really start to not have to give this mind these old stories, this old identity, your attention, and in essence, just not believe it, not believe the old stories. And from this place, start to entertain new stories you actually want to think. The other part that most people either completely skip over or get entirely wrong, because it's just honestly not very fun to hear. So, disclaimer, it's if you're a special snowflake, this might hurt your feelings. Not actually, but well, actually, yeah. So emotional suppression, emotional trauma, storing painful emotions in the body and then not dealing with them. And then trying, to mentally and cognitively layer a brand new identity over top of this suppression. So what I mean is, as you know, we all have emotions. We all have feelings that come up: fear, guilt, shame, the whole kit and caboodle. Most people, because the ego doesn't like pain and it doesn't want to feel these emotions, instead of dealing with them and processing them, we just tend to suppress them, push them down inside. The problem is, physiologically, when these emotions are not processed, they remain stuck in the body. And they are layered with thoughts. It acts as an entire system that works together. So a large part of your identity is actually emotional. It is these feelings of fear, guilt, shame that you have pushed down inside of your body over years and years, and haven't dealt with. So these emotions remain in the body until they're processed. And then you hear about, shifting your identity, and you go into the mind and you try to think new thoughts. But you're being held down by the anchors of your old emotions. And so the only way to actually deal with these emotions, the way to start to clear the way, and the way I like to think about this is, you're tending to the garden in the sense of, before you're laying seeds on top, you're mending to the soil. If you plant seeds of beautiful flowers over a field of weeds, then you're probably not going to get very good results. But if you take some time to tend to the soil itself in which you're implanting these new ideas, then they actually can take root and grow. Because in a place of extreme emotional suppression, there's not a lot of room for new thoughts, stories, identities to really take hold. And this goes pretty deep, but a big part of it is that when you are suppressing emotions and you're not processing them, your nervous system becomes dysregulated, basically. And within this place of anxiety, survival mode, dysregulation, the subconscious mind isn't accepting new ideas. And it's not trying to be successful. In that state of being, you're just trying to be literally okay. So if you're trying to use the cognitive mind to just plaster some positive thoughts over all of this emotional garbage, you can probably see why that's not going to work super well. So the way you begin to process these emotions, and this is the part that might trigger you, you just have to actually allow them. You need to allow them fully to come up and be felt. You need to give them space to exist without running for an escape or a distraction, or just trying to use your personal will to push them down inside of the body. And so these emotions, most of the time, they're trying to come up and be processed. That's what they're trying to do. So they peek their little head to the surface, and we say, oh, whoa, that is painful. I don't want to feel that. And so we push them down. We find a way, either by using some kind of escape, like any dopamine addiction type behavior, TV, nicotine, drinking, friend, you get the picture. We use something in the external world to try to push this feeling away, or we use our personal will to try to push it down. And this just keeps the emotion stuck in the body. So then we try to, build this new identity, but you really cannot swim, I guess you could, whatever the analogy may be, you can't outrun your suppressed emotion. So you need to start allowing these suppressed feelings to come up to the surface and give them your space. And by that I mean just be with them, allow them. Stop trying to do something about them. Stop trying to change them. There's nothing to be fixed because there's nothing actually wrong with you. It's the actual desire to constantly want to change what is, mentally and emotionally, that keeps it fueled. That leads me into the third point, which is a little bit hard to understand, honestly. And this is going to sound weird to you, and your ego is not going to understand what I'm saying, because the ego literally can't understand this. But stick with me because it's extremely important. Probably the most important point of this entire identity shifting thing. And it's the weird paradox, the backwards law, that whatever I am thinking about myself forcibly, whatever I'm forcing upon myself, I am in essence saying that I'm not there yet. So for example, let's say I was trying to be confident, and I'm trying to shift my identity into that of a confident person. Well, confident people don't need to go into a social situation and constantly repeat to themselves in their mind how confident they really are. That's like Bill Gates showing up at a party and going, I'm rich, I'm a super successful business guy, I'm so successful, I have so much money coming towards me. It's like, no, he doesn't do that. He is rich. He doesn't need to become rich. He just is. Same with confidence. You either just are being confident or you're not. The second you try to become confident, you're putting that on a pedestal and saying, I need to become this, and that's because I'm not this yet. So part of shifting your identity is not a doing. It's more of a deciding. And this can be really hard for people to understand, and I'm still, at the beginning of this kind of discovery. And it works for everything in life. For example, me making these videos. I used to really struggle through making a single video. And I would have a million cuts. I could not get my sentences out clearly, and I couldn't seem to clearly articulate what I was trying to say. And what I realized is I was trying really hard, and I was implementing these techniques to try to say like, oh, I'm really good at video making, I am super confident on camera, and then I'd be applying these techniques to try to make it so. But when I was at my most confident, I wasn't trying to apply anything. I was just being who I am. And that's really what I'm trying to say, is that a large part of becoming the person that you want to become is, sure, of course there is still the repetition factor, there's still neural pathways in your brain. I'm not refuting any of that. But there's that paradox that I'm talking about, the backwards law. And it's just that the harder you try to become it, the more you're saying, I'm not this yet. And so when I decided to film this video today, what I decided is I'm not going to apply any technique. I'm just going to pick up the camera, and whatever comes out, comes out. I'm not going to tell myself I'm confident. I'm not going to repeat affirmations about it. I'm not going to try to use some kind of spiritual technique to be more in the flow. I'm just going to let it all go and just say what comes to mind. And It's the same thing with shifting your identity. Instead of saying constantly like, I am successful, I am rich, I am, successful people, they don't say that to themselves. And now think about something in your life that's just become supernatural to you. How often per day do you repeat to yourself that you are good at X thing? Right? Let's say it's songwriting. I've been a songwriter for a long time, and I kind of naturally have always just been decent at it. I don't repeat to myself all day long, I am a great singer. I'm a great songwriter. I'm super good at this. I'm amazing at this. I just know that I am. So I just let it be that way. So part of the shift is just deciding this is who I am now. Right? And then there's still going to be the old momentum of the old identity that comes up. But when you're just as awareness and you're not identifying with that old identity, you just see it for what it is. Oh, it's just thoughts. It's my old patterns, old momentum playing out. This is who I am now. And you embody that. You live as that without making it this huge, big project. Not turning it into this extended task of like, one day I will become this, one day I will shift my identity. Just be that now. Live as that now. And stop trying to implement a technique, because anything you try to do is further saying that I'm not there yet. Now I know this got a little deep and confusing at times, because to the ego, this is very confusing and hard to hear. So I'm not expecting you to understand this right away and be like, oh, I get everything he's saying. It's something that plants a seed, and then it slowly grows over time of what this all kind of means. So don't expect it all to be perfect, and just notice the way your ego is going to try to grasp onto what I've said and turn it into the new secret. Because have you noticed that's what your mind tends to do? It tends to try to latch onto something, like an idea or a technique, or it's like, okay, the secret is to shift my identity. I'm going to make this my whole personality. But like I said, people who naturally are just living as the embodied identity of who they want to be, they're not turning it into a project. They just are. Hope this helped.